welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really curious human universal, or maybe near universal, something that almost every culture finds horrifying, but can't quite agree on exactly what it is.
It's a fascinating puzzle, isn't it? We're talking about the rules against marrying close relatives, the incest taboo.
Right, and a huge part of how we understand this today comes from, well, some pretty foundational work by Edvard Westermarck. Specifically, we're drawing on chapters 14 and 15 of his big 1901 book, The History of Human Marriage.
Exactly, and central to his whole argument is this concept called the Westermarck Effect.
Okay, let's define that first. What is the Westermarck Effect?
So it's sometimes called reverse sexual imprinting. It's basically a psychological idea. The theory is that people who grow up in really close domestic proximity during early childhood, say before age 6, develop a kind of sexual aversion to each other later on.
Aversion. So instead of familiarity breeding attraction, it does the opposite.
Precisely. The thinking is this isn't conscious. It's likely an evolutionary mechanism, a way to naturally discourage incest by reducing or just eliminating sexual interest between those raised like siblings.
Got it. So our mission for this deep dive then is to explore how this idea, this sort of innate aversion, helps make sense of the huge variety and sometimes, frankly, the bizarre contradictions we see in incest taboos around the world.
That's the plan. Westermarck himself started by saying, and I'm quoting roughly here, the horror of incest is an almost universal characteristic of mankind. He saw this deep feeling of revulsion as fundamental.
Almost universal.
Okay.
But then comes the tricky part.
Yeah.
Who exactly counts as incestuous?
Right. That's where the consistency just vanishes. I mean, parent-child relationships, especially mother-son, are condemned almost everywhere. That seems to be the strongest line.
Seems like it, yeah.
But even there, Westermarck found these, well, frankly, astonishing reports. The Kaniagmats, who apparently allowed parent-child cohabitation, or a king among the Warua whose harem supposedly included his own daughters.
Wow. Okay, so even the most basic taboo wasn't absolute.
Not absolute, absolute no. And then you get to brother-sister unions, and it gets even more varied. Sometimes not. Sometimes it depends on half-siblings versus full siblings.
Like Abraham marrying his half-sister Sarah, because they had different mothers.
Exactly that kind of thing. Or the Assyrians and Athenians, who apparently allowed marriage with a paternal half-sister. It wasn't a simple, single rule.
And it extends beyond immediate family, too, right? To aunts, uncles, cousins.
Oh, definitely. Huge variation there. Westermarck mentions the Ossets finding marriage with a mother's sister fine, but a father's sister, highly incestuous, total opposite logic,
Huh?
Or the Reddys in South India, a man marries his sister's daughter, that's okay. But marrying his aunt, nope, forbidden. And cousin marriage, well, that's a whole spectrum.
Right, because in Europe, places like Spain and Russia were pretty strict about cousins.
Relatively strict. But then you look at many other cultures Westermarck studied, what he termed uncivilized peoples, or Mohammedan communities. They often permitted cousin marriage. Some even preferred it, like Arabs having a traditional right to their paternal cousin's hand.
So the rules could be incredibly broad or surprisingly narrow.
And sometimes incredibly broad, extending to whole clans or tribes, with really severe consequences for breaking the rules.
Like the Algonquins putting men to death for marrying within their clan.
Yeah, or look at some Australian Aboriginal groups where Westermarck cites reports that any deviation from the complex marriage system was met with absolute horror, potentially punishable by death. And these prohibitions could stretch out to second cousins, or even people who just spoke the same dialect.
That's immense. In China, too, right? The surname thing.
Yes. The Chinese penal code he referenced had 60 blows as a penalty just for marrying someone with the same surname, which is a massive restriction when you consider there were only around 530 surnames in the whole empire at the time. Paternal first cousins or nephews, that could even be a capital offense.
It wasn't just blood ties either, was it? There was this idea of affinity.
Exactly. Moving beyond strict biology, like the Andamanese not marrying into a brother-in-law's family, or the Roman Church banning marriage between godparents and godchildren, a purely spiritual relationship creating a marriage barrier.
Okay, so it looks like total chaos, different rules, different reasons, different penalties. But Westermarck believed there was an underlying logic.
He did. He really wasn't satisfied with the explanations that came before him.
What kind of explanations were those?
Well, things like maybe it was about keeping property within a certain lineage, or maybe just a conscious realization that inbreeding wasn't good for offspring, or avoiding, sort of, social complications. He didn't think those fully explained the emotional reaction, the horror.
And what about McLennan's idea? About female infanticide.
Right, McLennan suggested that killing female infants led to a shortage of women within tribes, forcing men to capture wives from outside exogamy.
Makes a kind of surface level sense.
Maybe, but Westermarck pointed out the flaws. Female infanticide wasn't nearly universal enough to explain a near-universal taboo. And crucially, it didn't explain why men would refuse to marry the women who were available within their own tribe. Why the aversion?
Good point. And Herbert Spencer's theory
Yeah.
about wives as war trophies.
Similar issue. Spencer thought maybe the preference for foreign wives came from the prestige of having captured them like trophies.
Okay.
But again, Westermarck argued that's resistance. Well, he found it impossible to suppose that that powerful feeling of revulsion against marrying your mother or sister or daughter could stem from a vain desire to have a trophy in his wife. It just didn't match the depth of the feeling.
So if it's not property, or politics, or trophies, or even necessarily a conscious understanding of genetics, where does this visceral horror come from? What was Westermarck's big idea?
This is the core of it. He proposed it stems from an innate aversion to sexual intercourse between persons living very closely together from early youth.
Okay, unpack that. It's not about knowing you're related by blood.
Not primarily, no. It's about the experience, the day-in, day-out intimacy of being raised together, especially during those crucial early years. Since your closest relatives are usually the ones you share that experience with, the aversion naturally gets attached to them.
So it's like the closeness itself triggers a not sexual response, an instinct.
That's the idea. An instinct, not a learned rule passed down consciously. He even quotes Plato, noting that for most people, the desire simply isn't there for those they grew up with. It's a psychical impossibility under normal circumstances, as Westermarck put it.
Does the ethnographic evidence back this up, the idea of proximity over blood?
He certainly argued it did. He pointed to examples like the Greenlanders or Cisnatalian Kaffirs, who reportedly dislike marriages between any people raised in the same household, even if not closely related by blood. And remember that case from the northern New Hebrides. The boy betrothed since childhood who felt much ashamed when he realized his fiancée wasn't actually his sister because they'd grown up so closely. That really speaks to the proximity idea.
Yeah, that's striking.
Or the Penches of Bogota people from the same town were considered brothers and sisters, marriage forbidden. But if your actual sister was born and raised in a different town, marriage might be okay. It really emphasizes shared upbringing over just shared parents.
And this ties into the breadth of the taboos, too.
Absolutely. Westermarck saw a strong link. Cultures with big communal living arrangements like Iroquois longhouses, Australian Aboriginal camps, South Slavonian house communities tended to have very wide-ranging prohibitions. Basically, everyone you lived closely with became off-limits.
Because the intimate, shared upbringing circle was much larger.
Exactly. Whereas in societies where families lived more separately, like the Maoris or Sinhalese he mentions, the incest prohibitions were often much narrower. Cousin marriage might be fine because cousins likely didn't grow up in that same intense daily intimacy.
So the living arrangements shaped the scope of the aversion.
That was his argument. And it also helped explain why rules often followed kinship lines, paternal or maternal, because that's how households and close communities were often structured. The Chinese surname rule fits here too. The surname signifies a shared group identity, implying a kind of extended shared household historically, even if distant.
And the spiritual relationships, like godparents.
He saw that as further proof. It shows the idea of closeness, of a familial-type bond created through social convention could trigger a similar, though perhaps weaker, aversion. It reinforces that intimacy, not just biology, is key.
Okay, so we have this innate aversion born from proximity. But why? Why would evolution favor such an instinct?
Right, this connects to the bigger evolutionary picture. Westermarck's suggestion was natural selection. Early humans didn't need to understand genetics.
They just needed a mechanism that happened to prevent close inbreeding?
Exactly. Look at Darwin's work, which Westermarck was heavily influenced by. Across the plant and animal kingdoms, cross-fertilization generally leads to stronger, healthier offspring. Close inbreeding or self-fertilization often results in, well, problems: reduced vitality, lower fertility, smaller size.
It's about genetic diversity being beneficial.
Fundamentally, yes. Westermarck argued, quite forcefully, it is impossible to believe that a law which holds good for the rest of the animal kingdom does not apply to man also.
Makes sense. But proving it in humans is difficult.
Very. No experiments, obviously. And the effects aren't always dramatic or immediate. But Westermarck compiled evidence suggesting negative consequences. He points to the Vedas of Ceylon, who practiced sister marriage extensively.
The ones described as in and inbred.
Yes. And observers at the time noted things like short stature, low vitality, few children, short lifespans, linking it directly to their marriage customs. Now, we have to be careful with these historical sources. They often carry the biases of their era.
Of course, understood. But it's what Westermarck was working with.
It is. And he also looked at statistical studies from Europe on first-cousin marriages. While not always conclusive, researchers like G.H. Darwin found trends towards slightly lower vitality, higher offspring mortality, and links to conditions like deafness or cognitive impairments.
So some quantitative hints, even if complex.
And crucially, he noted these negative effects seemed much worse in tougher environments where the struggle for existence was more severe. Weaknesses caused by inbreeding would be more quickly selected against.
Examples.
He cites reports about Brazilian Indian communities deteriorating due to generations of close marriage. The Hottentots supposedly weakened by marrying only within their small groups. The Lindu Cdx in Borneo, whose population decline and infertility were explicitly blamed by an observer on constant intermarriages.
It's like the environmental pressure magnified the biological cost.
That seems to be the implication. And what's also interesting is that Westermarck notes many backward races, as he termed them, actually had traditions or beliefs linking close marriage to bad outcomes. Sickly children, monsters, general decline, suggesting maybe a kind of intuitive grasp of the dangers, even without scientific understanding.
So the ultimate conclusion here is that close inbreeding is somehow biologically disadvantageous for humans.
Yes, detrimental to the species overall. Therefore, the horror of incest isn't something we consciously invented for social reasons. It's an instinct, an aversion shaped by natural selection because individuals and groups who avoided close inbreeding tended to have healthier, more numerous offspring who survived and passed on that same aversion.
The Westermarck effect is essentially evolution's way of handling the problem without us needing to think about it.
That's the core idea.
Is there maybe a flip side to this aversion, an attraction aspect? I think Westermarck touched on this briefly.
He does, yeah. He mentions thinkers like Schopenhauer suggesting that love often arises from contrasts, that we might be drawn to people with different traits.
Like opposites attract.
Sort of. And some, like the breeder Andrew Knight he references, even speculated this could be biologically advantageous, leading to more vigorous offspring if parents had different hereditary constitutions.
Is there strong evidence for that? Attraction to difference.
The evidence Westermarck had was pretty mixed, more speculative really, but it's an interesting complementary thought. If aversion pushes us away from the familiar, perhaps a subtle attraction to difference pulls us towards potentially better genetic matches. It reinforces that drive for differentiation.
So wrapping this up, this deep dive into Westermarck really reframes the incest taboo, doesn't it? It's not just a social rule we came up with.
Not at all. It suggests it's this deep-seated psychological aversion baked in by evolution because it helped our ancestors thrive by avoiding the pitfalls of close inbreeding. The social rules we see are perhaps built on top of this underlying instinct.
And it all comes back to that early childhood proximity, the crucible where this aversion is forged.
Exactly. Those intense bonds of early life become non-sexual, protective even, safeguarding our biological fitness without us ever needing to consciously decide. The Westermarck effect is this unseen force shaping our fundamental relationships.
It really makes you think differently about family, attraction, what feels natural. So for you listening, consider this. How does knowing about the Westermarck effect potentially change how you view human relationships or social norms? And what other universal human behaviors, things we just take for granted, might have similar hidden evolutionary roots driving them?